Can a single curve, a millisecond of indecision, or even the traffic of another car to be enough to snatch a pilot a victory in his house? What really failed in Ferrari so that Charles Leclerc would not win the GP of Monaco 2025, when everything indicated that it was his? The 2025 season had been a Russian mountain for Ferrari. With Lewis Hamilton's arrival to the team, the foci multiplied. The comparisons were inevitable and the pressure intense. However, in the environment of the Monaco GP, everything seemed to align in favor of Leclerc. From the first free training, the SF25 showed a natural affinity with the narrow and technical layout of the Principality. The tuning of the car responded with surgical precision, allowing Charles to attack the pianos and dangerously approach the walls, maximizing every millimeter of the circuit. Italian engineers knew that this was one of the few circuits where the power deficit against McLaren or Mercedes was diluted, and that if there was a place where they could match strength, it was there. Leclerc, on the other hand, was focused, with a more analytical, cold and meticulous mentality than in previous years. He had learned from the past disappointments, of waste wasted for strategic errors or mechanical failures, and this time he did not want to leave any loose end. Throughout the weekend, the narrative revolved around a single idea. This was Leclerc's weekend. The media knew it, fans felt it, and Ferrari needed it. In a context of growing rivalry with McLaren, each race became a duel of titans between Norris and Leclerc, two pilots of close generations but different styles. While Norris trusted his ability to adapt and his brilliance in the race rhythm, Leclerc opted for his classification explosiveness and his ability to take the car to the limit in high-pressure conditions. The atmosphere in Monte Carlo was electric. The streets were filled with red Ferrari, banks with the name of Charles, and of a tension that was in crescendo with each free session. Leclerc knew that pole was his if he managed to join all sectors, and during the previous sessions he proved to have the rhythm. But I also knew that pole in Monaco is not only half a work done, it is the master key. Without it, even the fastest car is caught in traffic, victim of its own efficiency. In Monaco, being second is being a prisoner. And for that, every detail in the preparation, from the temperature of the tires to the exact millisecond to go on track in the Q3, was fundamental. The expectation was not just personal. It was institutional. Ferrari needed a blow of authority. A result that will consolidate the direction of the Vasseur project and that will justify the investments, technical changes and the stellar signing of Hamilton. A victory at Leclerc's house meant much more than 25 points. It was the symbol of a team that operated again, of a project that rearmed from its foundations. Therefore, when Saturday afternoon came, the air smelled of redemption. But also to fragility, because in Monaco, as in life, an instant is enough for everything to fall apart. The classification of Saturday in Monaco is, year after year, one of the most tense and determining sessions of the entire season. In no other circuit, the exit position becomes as important as in the narrow and winding streets of the Principality. Here it is not just about being the fastest, but about being the first. To leave absolutely everything in a return, with the wall breathing in the neck and the pressure transforming into thousands. And in 2025, this session was a microcosm of what represents Formula One in its purest state. Surgical precision, maximum risk, and a psychological battle to the limit. Charles Leclerc knew it. From the moment he went up to SF25 to play Q3, he was aware that this was his time. The car was responding well. There was consistency in the sensations. Ferrari had given in the nail with the adjustments. The plan was simple: mark a strong time in the first attempt, and then improve in the second if the conditions allowed. But in Monaco nothing is so simple. In his first fast round, Leclerc found traffic in the second sector. A pair of wasteful tenths that, although at first glance they seemed recoverable, left it without a solid reference to face their final attempt with absolute confidence. Without a strong personal benchmark, the second attempt is not executed with the same aggressiveness. Each blind curve is not attacked with the same decision, each piano, each braking to the limit. Meanwhile, McLaren played his cards with surgical coldness. Oscar Piastri tried a last round, but his tires no longer had the same adhesion. It was not a problem. The real blow came from his partner. Lando Norris came out in the last second with a free track in ideal conditions. Everything was reduced to a single round. In that final turn, Norris found a superhuman level of precision. His sectors were perfect, especially the second, where Leclerc had lost tenths. Each curve fit as an exact piece of the puzzle. And when he crossed the goal, the clock spoke. 0.109 seconds faster than Leclerc. An almost imperceptible difference to the naked eye, but brutal in its meaning. Ferrari's box was frozen. There were no mistakes in Leclerc's return. There were no blockades, there were no skids. It was simply not quick enough. Charles himself, when getting out of the car, reflected a mixture of disbelief and frustration. I knew that 10th was not just a position. It was, in effect, the victory escaping from the fingers. He acknowledged to the press that he had given everything he had, that the return had been really good, but that he couldn't do more. And that impotence is the worst type of defeat for a pilot. The cruelest of all was that even the rivals knew it. Zak Brown, McLaren CEO, was direct. Ferrari was faster than us this weekend, but Norris made a perfect turn. That statement encapsulated the entire Ferrari tragedy. They had the best car, the most motivated pilot, and still fell short. Because in Monaco it is not enough to have the best package. You have to execute perfectly at the exact moment. And that moment, that magical turn, did not belong to Leclerc. The coup was not just a technician. It was emotional. Leclerc is a pilot with a visceral connection with the classification. Build your weekends around that session. It is there where it normally makes the difference. And losing that pole in that circuit with that car in front of its people was devastating. Moreover, knowing that there would be no real opportunity to overcome in the race. In his mind, on Sunday it was no longer a battlefield, but a frustrating procession behind an untouchable rival. The team, despite everything, tried to keep calm. They knew that a second place was still a position of force. But they also knew that, except for a Norris error or a strategic miracle, the opportunity was lost on Saturday afternoon. And that, for Ferrari and for Leclerc, was an open wound that was going to hurt a lot of time. Sunday morning in Monaco always has a special air. The streets of the Principality wake up with the expectation of an event that transcends the sports. For Charles Leclerc, that day had an emotional weight that no other grill pilot can understand. It was his opportunity to redeem himself, to convert Saturday frustration into pure determination. But I also knew that the margin of action was minimal. In Monaco, the script of the race is usually written with indelible ink from the classification. The strategies are limited, scarce opportunities and errors unforgivable. From the moment the lights of the traffic light went out, the tone of the race was clear. Leclerc made a clean exit without errors but also without miracles. Lando Norris, starting from the pole, defended with intelligence, placing himself right where he should avoid any attempt to attack in the first curve. From that moment on, the SF25 was encased behind the McLaren, condemned to follow him as a shadow. The difference between the two oscillated between 0.7 and a second during the first laps, an insufficient distance for an attack but too big to force an error. Ferrari, aware that advancing on the track was practically impossible, opted for the strategic route. His first movement was to simulate an undercut, making Leclerc increase his rhythm in a subtle way to force McLaren to react. However, McLaren read the play perfectly. His wall, led by Andrea Stella and with the support of Will Joseph, a career engineer of Norris, responded with coldness and precision. They kept Lando on track just what was necessary to cover any aggressive attempt by Ferrari, and when they entered boxes they executed an impeccable stop. At that time, any hope of Leclerc to win at the Pittsburgh lane vanished. As the race advanced, impotence grew. Leclerc maintained a competitive rhythm, even at times better than Norris, but never enough to force an error. The SF25, despite its good general performance, did not have the necessary traction in slow curves to approach with decision, or an advantage in peak speed that would even allow it to hint an attempt in the tunnel or in the descent towards Monegasque. Everything was containment. Everything was psychological resistance. Ferrari evaluated an option: extend the Leclerc stint beyond the logical margin, waiting for a possible security car. But the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix was, ironically, clean. No incident, without yellow flags, without interruptions that offered a tactical window. What in other years would have been a blessing, this year was a condemnation for Leclerc. Everything worked with too much perfection for McLaren. No error, no crack, no weak point that could be exploited. The most bleak moment came to the last 10 laps. Leclerc, frustrated but stoic, asked for radio a check over the difference with the third. Upon receiving confirmation that he had a comfortable margin, he understood what he should do: ensure second place. There was no glory in that decision but responsibility. With the championship still open, those points were worth gold. It was not only a career but an entire campaign. However, for a pilot who lives with his soul on each lap, raising his foot knowing that you cannot fight is silent torture. When crossing the finish line, Leclerc's gesture said everything. There was no fist at high, there was no celebration. Only a bitter acceptance of a defeat that was not due to errors or lack of preparation. but to the ruthless circumstances of a sport that does not forgive even the slightest slip. In his mind, the race was lost on Saturday. On Sunday, it was only the painful confirmation that, in Formula One, perfection does not guarantee victory, but any shadow of imperfection, however small, can take it mercilessly. When the engines went out and the cameras focused on Charles Leclerc after getting out of the car in Monte Carlo, the image was that of a pilot he had fulfilled but not conquered. His gesture was serene, almost inexpressive, but there was no need to say a word. The frustration was there, contained in the way in which he released the gloves, in the lost look that dodged photographers, in the slow walking to the podium. This was not the Leclerc of the tantrums of past years. He was a more mature pilot, more content, but also more marked by the scars of a career that was elusive not because of his own error, but by the relentless whims of the elite of Formula One. Leclerc's defeat at the Monaco 2025 Grand Prix cannot be measured only in terms of positions or points. It was a symbolic defeat. A cruel confirmation that, even when everything seems to be aligned, the smallest mismatch in execution can collapse the castle of expectations. Ferrari had brought a competitive car, they had prepared the weekend with meticulousness, they had made Leclerc feel comfortable from the first free. And yet they lost. Not due to structural failures, not for lack of performance, but for tenths of a second for a calculation of track, due to the perfect turn of arrival. And that, precisely, is what makes this experience one of the toughest lessons that Ferrari and his star pilot have had to face. Because in Monaco, as in the entire Formula One, the one who deserves does not win, the one who executes surgical precision wins. And for more talent behind the wheel, if external factors align against you, there is no human way to change the outcome without assuming blind risks. For Leclerc, this was a painful reminder that in its most personal circuit, even with everything in favor, victory cannot be taken for granted. And for Ferrari, it was a warning that being close is not enough, that the project needs that degree of excellence that transforms potential into reality. The most worrying thing for Maranello is that this defeat does not expose clear failures to correct. There were no rude mistakes, no flagrant decisions. And that is what makes it more difficult to digest. Because how it improves what is already well, but it was not enough. How do you train a pilot to be even faster when everything it can be? How is a car that paid as expected, but was overcome by a rival genius? These are questions that the technical team must face in the next great awards if it wants to prevent this defeat from becoming a trend. In spite of everything, there is a valuable lesson that can be born from this experience: resilience. Leclerc has demonstrated an evolution as a competitor. He did not break inside, he did not look guilty, he did not fall on the easy complaint. He kept his head cold and accepted the result with dignity. And that attitude, that temper, will be key if Ferrari wants to convert this stumbling block into an impulse. Because the championship continues and the battle for the title is open. But there is no room for errors, not even 1/10. Each session, every return, every decision will be critical.